The room went quiet when the slide came up on the screen. My solution, my framework, my words, polished, simplified, repackaged, and his name at the bottom. I felt it before I fully understood it, that sharp, sinking heat in my chest, the kind you learn to swallow in corporate America if you want to survive. I kept my face neutral, pen still, posture perfect. Years of practice had trained me well. "Brilliant work," the VP said, nodding at him. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking our clients are paying for." He smiled, not nervous, not guilty, confident, comfortable, like the idea had been his all along. I was sitting 3 chairs away. This wasn't the first time my contributions had been minimized, rephrased, or delivered in a deeper voice so they sounded more acceptable. But this time was different. This time, the project was mine from the ground up. I'd spent nights refining the model, weekends running simulations, mornings rewriting decks so they'd land clean with executive clients. He had watched, asked questions, nodded, took notes, then scheduled the presentation without me. I told myself to breathe, to stay strategic, to remember that reputation matters more than reaction. Still, my hands were shaking under the table. After the meeting, he caught up to me in the hallway. "Great energy in there, right?" he said casually. "The clients loved it." The clients. Not we, not the team, just him and his imaginary brilliance. "I noticed my research notes were used verbatim," I replied, keeping my tone light, non-threatening, professional. He laughed. Actually laughed. "That's how collaboration works," he said. "You're great at the groundwork. I'm just better at presenting the vision." Groundwork, like I was laying bricks for someone else's building. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the email thread. The timestamps, the drafts, the version history that clearly showed my authorship. I didn't forward anything. Not yet. Corporate taught me one thing early. Timing is power. 2 days later, everything changed. I was refilling my coffee when my manager rushed out of her office, phone pressed tight to her ear. Her eyes flicked to me, surprised, almost startled, before she turned away. "Yes," she said carefully. "She's here. Why do you ask?" She listened, her posture stiffened. Then she turned back toward me, slow this time, and mouthed 4 words that made my pulse spike. "They're asking for you." Minutes later, I was sitting across from the executive team as my manager explained, still slightly flustered. The clients were impressed, very impressed, but they've requested a follow-up. I nodded politely. "They said," she continued, "they want to meet the woman behind the solution." Across the room, his smile finally disappeared. And in that moment, I realized something important. He may have taken the credit, but he had no idea what was coming next. I didn't look at him when the meeting ended. I didn't need to. The tension followed us back to the floor, thick and quiet, the kind no one names but everyone feels. He walked faster than usual, shoulders tight, already rehearsing explanations he wouldn't say out loud. At my desk, I finally let myself breathe. An hour later, my manager called me in. She closed the door gently, the way people do when they think they're about to deliver bad news disguised as opportunity. "So," she began, folding her hands, "the clients were very specific." I waited. They don't want a summary. They don't want another deck. They want a live walkthrough of the framework, how it was built, why certain decisions were made. Her eyes searched my face. They want you to lead it. There it was. No celebration, no apology. Just a quiet correction. "I'm happy to," I said, calm, composed, like my name hadn't been erased 2 days earlier. She hesitated. "Of course, this will still be positioned as a team effort." I smiled, naturally. When I stood to leave, she added, "He'll be on the call too." That night, I didn't rush to prepare slides. I opened my old notebooks instead, the messy ones, the versions before everything had been simplified and sanitized, the assumptions I'd tested, the risks I'd flagged, the ones he'd told me were too detailed for clients. I knew something he didn't. Clients don't ask to meet the creator unless they already sense the difference between a messenger and a mind. The next morning, he stopped by my desk. "Looks like we'll be partnering closely," he said, leaning against the divider like nothing had happened. I looked up slowly. We always were. His smile flickered. "I'll handle the high-level narrative. You can jump in if they ask technical questions." There it was again. Containment, control. I nodded. Sounds good. But inside, I made a decision. I wouldn't expose him. I wouldn't correct him publicly. I wouldn't even mention the credit. I would let the work speak, fully this time. The day of the call, the clients joined early, cameras on, not distracted, engaged. He started confidently, walking through the slides they'd already seen. Then one of them interrupted. "Can we pause?" the lead client said. "This framework, why did you choose that risk model instead of the industry standard?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I leaned forward slightly. "That's because the industry model assumes uniform access to data. In your case, the gaps would have created blind spots by Q3, so I rebuilt it from the dependency layer up." The client's eyebrows lifted. Another voice chimed in. "That explains the variance we noticed, and the contingency triggers? I designed those after stress testing worst-case scenarios," I replied. "They're adaptive, not fixed. That's the real value." Silence. Not awkward, reverent. They started directing questions to me, not rudely, not dramatically, just naturally. Like gravity had shifted. By the end of the call, the lead client smiled. "This makes sense now," she said. "Thank you for walking us through your thinking." Your. After everyone logged off, he sat back in his chair, pale. "That went well," he said quietly. "Yes," I agreed. "It did." An email landed in my inbox before the hour was over. Subject: Next Phase Leadership. They weren't asking for clarification anymore. They were asking for ownership. And this time, my name was already on it. But I knew better than to think the fight was over, because credit reclaimed is one thing. Watching someone realize they're losing control, that's when people get dangerous. The office felt different after that call. Not louder, quieter. People smiled at me more in passing, held eye contact a second longer. My calendar started filling up with quick syncs that weren't so quick and definitely weren't accidental. Leadership suddenly wanted my opinion, not in meetings, but before them, as if they were trying to understand when I had become unavoidable. He noticed too. He stopped dropping by my desk, stopped including me on casual threads. When he did speak to me, his tone was careful now, almost respectful, the way people act when they're recalculating power in real time. Then came the meeting invite. Subject: Strategic alignment. Leadership only. Leadership only. I reread it twice. When I walked into the conference room, I understood immediately what this was. HR was there, legal too. My manager avoided my eyes, which told me everything before anyone spoke. They didn't mention his name at first. They talked about growth, client confidence, expansion, how the project had exceeded expectations, how the clients specifically requested continuity, my continuity, moving forward. Then the VP folded his hands and smiled. "We're restructuring the account," he said. "Effective immediately, you'll be stepping into a lead role." No applause, no announcement, just a quiet shift in gravity. I nodded. Understood. "And," he added, glancing at HR, "we'll be adjusting reporting lines." That was the moment I felt it. Not joy, not triumph, relief. After the meeting, I walked back to my desk, promotion sitting on my shoulders like something fragile. People congratulated me in whispers, like the news itself was still deciding whether it was safe to exist. He was waiting, standing, arms crossed, face composed in that way men learn when they're trying not to look threatened. "So it's official," he said. "Yes," I replied. He exhaled through his nose. "Guess congratulations are in order." "Thank you." A pause stretched between us. "They didn't have to do it like this," he said finally. "It makes things awkward." I looked at him then. Really looked. Awkward for who? I asked. His jaw tightened. You know what I mean. I did. He meant him. I said, they made a business decision, calmly. The clients were clear. He nodded slowly, then leaned in, lowering his voice. Just remember, he said, this place has a long memory. People don't always appreciate sudden rises. There it was. Not a threat, a reminder. I smiled softly. Neither do clients. That afternoon, an email went out company-wide announcing the restructure, carefully worded, neutral, bloodless. No mention of ideas stolen, no correction of the past, just a present that no longer included him at the center. But I knew something was coming. People don't lose credit quietly. They look for leverage. And 2 days later, he found what he thought was his. HR emailed me, requesting a meeting. Subject, documentation review. My stomach didn't drop. It stilled. In the room, a folder sat on the table. Printed emails, highlighted lines, notes in the margins. We received concerns, HR said gently, about authorship and collaboration practices on the account. I nodded. I expected that. They looked surprised. I reached into my bag and placed my own folder on the table. Thicker, heavier. Version histories, time-stamped drafts, calendar invites I'd never been included on, messages where he asked for input that later appeared as finalized solutions under his name. I slid it forward. I never raised the issue, I said evenly, because the clients didn't need conflict. They needed clarity. Silence filled the room. Legal cleared his throat. This, he said slowly, is extensive. I folded my hands. I keep records. When the meeting ended, HR thanked me for my professionalism. Professionalism, the word people use when they realize you could have burned everything down and chose not to. As I walked back to my desk, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You think you've won. This isn't over. I stared at the screen, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. They were right about one thing. It wasn't over. Because the clients weren't just satisfied anymore. They were about to make a request that would change everything, and this time it would happen in public. The request came on a Thursday morning, wrapped in corporate politeness and disguised as opportunity. Subject, Client Summit, Speaker Confirmation. I was halfway through my coffee when I read it. The clients were hosting a private strategy summit, high level, closed doors, decision makers only, and they wanted a featured segment on the framework. Not the slides, not the deliverables, but the thinking behind it. They wanted me on stage. Not the team, not the department, me. I didn't smile right away. Experience had taught me that visibility in corporate spaces is a double-edged thing, especially when it arrives faster than people are ready to explain. When I told my manager, her reaction confirmed it. That's significant, she said slowly. We'll need to align internally before responding. Align, another word for control the narrative. Within hours, meetings appeared on my calendar. Directors I'd never spoken to suddenly had opinions about messaging, about tone, about how much of the process should be shared. And then there was him. He joined the meeting late, slid into the chair across from me, and smiled like we were co-authors again. I think it makes sense if we present together, he said smoothly. It reinforces collaboration. The room hummed with uncomfortable agreement. I waited. I disagree, I said, voice calm. The clients were explicit. A pause. They asked for the architect of the framework. Putting someone else on stage would dilute that. He leaned back. Or it could show unity. Unity, the word people use when they're afraid of separation. The VP cleared his throat. We don't want this to appear divisive. I nodded. Then let's not divide credit where it doesn't belong. No one spoke after that. The decision came later that afternoon. I would speak alone. Officially, it was framed as efficiency, logistically cleaner, client-driven. Neutral language that hid a very loud truth. The company could no longer pretend they didn't know who built the solution. The days leading up to the summit were tense. He stopped pretending altogether. Emails copied unnecessarily, questions designed to trip me, casual comments about risk and exposure slipped into conversations like accidents. He wasn't trying to outshine me anymore. He was trying to unsettle me. But I wasn't new to this. I'd learned long ago that when people feel replaced, they start revealing themselves. The night before the summit, I stood in my hotel room rehearsing, not memorizing lines, but grounding myself in ownership. Every decision I'd made, every assumption I'd challenged, every moment I'd been told to simplify something that mattered. This wasn't about revenge, it was about presence. The room the next morning was full. Executives, investors, the clients who had started all of this. When I stepped onto the stage, I felt the weight of eyes, curious, assessing, ready to decide who I was. I didn't start with numbers. I started with a question. What happens, I asked, when a system is built by someone who understands where it fails? Silence. Then attention. I walked them through the framework the way it had always lived in my mind. Layered, intentional, honest about risk. I spoke about constraints, not as weaknesses, but as design signals. I didn't rush. I didn't shrink. I watched heads nod, pens move, people lean forward. By the time I finished, the lead client stood. "This," she said, "is why we insisted on meeting you." Applause followed, real, unrestrained, and somewhere in the back of the room, I saw him, not clapping, calculating. After the session, executives approached me with cards, with interest, with offers framed as conversations. One of them said something I'd never forget. "We've been looking for you," he said. "We just didn't know your name." Later that evening, my phone rang. Internal number. HR. "We need to talk," they said. "Something's come up." I looked out over the city lights, the applause still echoing in my chest. "Of course," I replied, "because when the spotlight stops asking permission, the fallout always comes next. And this time, the truth was about to surface, whether he was ready or not. HR didn't waste time on pleasantries. When I arrived the next morning, legal was already there. 2 folders on the table, one thin, one thick. I knew, instinctively, which one belonged to me. "This isn't disciplinary," HR began, careful with every word. "It's corrective." Corrective. A word that admits damage without admitting fault. They slid the thin folder forward. It contained his complaint. He claims exclusion, marginalization, that the narrative had shifted without his consent, that leadership had suddenly reframed contributions in a way that made him look secondary. Secondary. I didn't react. I let the silence do the work. Then legal opened the thicker folder. "This," he said, "is what surfaced after the summit. Not from me, from the clients." Emails, notes, follow-ups, one message highlighted in yellow. "We were surprised to learn she wasn't formally recognized earlier. Her command of the framework suggests long-term authorship. Please clarify internal ownership before next phase." Clarify internal ownership. The truth hadn't been dragged out. It had been requested. HR looked uncomfortable now. "He says you never objected," she said calmly, "that you were fine with the arrangement." "I wasn't fine," I replied evenly. "I was strategic." Legal raised an eyebrow. "I understood the power structure," I continued, "and I understood timing. I chose not to create internal conflict that would jeopardize client confidence." I paused. "But I also never misrepresented my role." Silence again. Then HR asked the question they'd been circling. "Why didn't you report it earlier?" I met her eyes. "Because women like me don't get second chances if we're labeled difficult," I said calmly. "We get watched, we get remembered. So I waited until the work spoke loudly enough that it couldn't be ignored." No one interrupted me. Legal closed the folder slowly. "That aligns with what the clients observed," he said. When the meeting ended, they thanked me again for restraint, for documentation, for professionalism. Another quiet acknowledgement that the system only works when someone survives it long enough to expose its cracks. By noon, the office felt electric. Whispers followed him now. Meetings he used to lead were reassigned. His calendar, once packed, suddenly had space. He avoided eye contact, moved quickly, spoke little. And then, finally, he came to me. Not confident, not smiling, cornered. "They're rewriting history," he said quietly, standing too close to my desk. "You know that, right?" I looked up slowly. "History doesn't need rewriting when the records are intact." His voice dropped. "You're letting them push me out." I stood. I didn't push, I built. That afternoon, an internal announcement went out. Subject, account governance update. Carefully worded, bloodless again, but clear. I was named principal lead, sole point of contact, strategic owner. His name appeared only once, under support. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt closure beginning. But corporate stories don't end cleanly. They end quietly, until they don't. As I packed up that evening, my phone buzzed. A forwarded email, anonymous, an old thread, dated months back. Him, my idea, sent to leadership, before the projects had even officially started, before my name was ever attached. Below it, a note from a director. "Looks promising. Let's see if he can execute." My hands stilled. This wasn't opportunism. This was premeditation. I stared at the screen, pulse steady, mind clear, because now the story wasn't about credit anymore. It was about intent. And intent changes everything. I locked my phone, shut down my computer, and walked out into the evening knowing one thing for certain. Chapter 6 wouldn't be about what he took, it would be about what the company would have to face now that the full truth had a timestamp, and this time, there would be no quiet correction. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. Not HR, not legal. Executive leadership. The kind of invite that doesn't come with an agenda, because the agenda is already decided. When I walked in, the room was full. CEO at the head, board liaison on screen, compliance seated quietly to the side. The air wasn't tense, it was resolved. That's how you know the outcome is already moving. The CEO gestured for me to sit. "We received additional documentation," he said. "Timestamped, verified." I nodded once. No speech, no explanation. I didn't need to convince anyone anymore. They already knew. The email had changed everything, not because ideas were shared, that happens every day, but because of sequence, because of intent, because he had positioned himself as originator while quietly building a narrative that excluded me before I even had visibility. That's not collaboration. That's architecture. "We're addressing this formally," the CEO continued, "immediately." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, recognition. He wasn't in the room. He didn't get a meeting. He got a notice. By noon, the company-wide email went out. Subject, leadership update. No drama, no accusations, just facts. Acknowledgement of misattributed work, correction of authorship, statement on values, and a final line that landed with quiet finality. Effective today, he is no longer with the company. No explanation beyond that. Corporate justice is rarely loud, but it is permanent. The clients were informed personally, transparency framed as trust. They responded with something unexpected: expansion, new scope, long-term partnership. One of them said, "Integrity scales. We choose partners who do too." That afternoon, my manager came to my desk. "I owe you an apology," she said, "for not seeing it sooner." I looked at her. You saw it, you just didn't have proof yet. She nodded. You handled this differently than most would. I had to, I said. People like me don't get to be reckless. That evening, as I packed up, the office felt lighter. Not because he was gone, but because the truth had been allowed to stay. At home, I opened my laptop one last time and saved the final version of the framework. Author? Me. I thought about all the moments I'd been told to wait, to be patient, to trust the process. And I smiled, because I hadn't waited quietly. I had documented. I had built. I had outlasted. The clients didn't ask for the loudest voice. They asked for the woman behind the solution, and when they found her, the entire system had no choice but to adjust. That's the kind of revenge no one sees coming, the kind that doesn't raise its voice. It corrects the record and keeps moving forward.